In the past, my dissociative identity disorder was very unconscious to me. I felt very disconnected from my own sense of self, and also disconnected from my emotions. So to me, I felt a lot like a ghost, or like a hollow, empty vessel. And then the other parts inside my mind would hold a lot of awareness of emotions and experiences. When I was younger, I didn't know what they were, and I didn't really know what was happening. So I came up with a lot of theories about what was happening to me. I used to worry that the dissociated parts were ghosts and demons, and I worried that I was being haunted. I thought that maybe I had a connection to the spirit realm, and that I was being haunted by these ghosts. I was really afraid when I first told my therapist about hearing voices inside my head, because there's a huge stigma against hearing voices. I didn't know what the voices in my head were. I could hear a lot of them talking to each other, and I didn't know what was going on. Sometimes I worried that I was losing my mind and that I would not ever be able to be functional in the future. I was really afraid, and I asked my therapist if they thought that I was crazy. That's when they explained to me that hearing voices in your head, that can be your subconscious communicating with you. I feel really grateful that I was able to work with a therapist early on who understood about dissociated parts and was able to let me know that what's happening makes sense, and let me know that I don't have to be afraid of my own experiences and what's going on in my mind. I found it really helpful in my own progress to learn not to be so afraid of the presence of the other dissociated parts. Being open to the communication from the other parts has also been a really helpful part of recovery, because this allows me to know what they're thinking and feeling and what they need, and allows us all to become more connected through communication. I have a lot of communication from the other parts through talking in my head. So I will hear a spoken voice that's not my voice and not the sound of my internal thoughts. It's a spoken voice that sounds like somebody else. I also have a lot of communication from the dissociated parts through dreams. So far before I knew that I had dissociative identity disorder, even as a child, I would see the other parts in dreams and they would communicate with me there. There's also an internal world that the dissociated parts live in, basically another dimension in the subconscious realm. And I see this internal world a lot through dreams as well. So a lot of our communication takes place through there. Also, I can pick up nowadays, now that I'm a little more integrated, I can pick up on the other parts' thoughts and feelings a lot of the time, as if communicating with another person through telepathy. During childhood, it's usually very unconscious. You can become more aware of it as you get older, and as you move away from the environment that required the dissociation in the first place. Once you're in a safer, more stable environment, then you are able to safely process the experiences that you weren't able to face in the past. And then they can start becoming reintegrated and reconnected to your own sense of self and awareness. With C-PTSD and PTSD, this can involve the reintegration of emotional and sensory experiences. With DID and OSDD, it also involves reintegration and awareness of other senses of self. Part of healing is to become aware of the other senses of self and the experiences and emotions that they hold. Learning how to hold those experiences together. The more I've learned how to regulate my own nervous system, the safer I've felt to acknowledge internal experiences. I used to be completely disconnected from emotions, and emotions were extremely overwhelming to feel. So a lot of my early progress was in learning how to acknowledge and feel my own emotions. I found it helpful to regard emotions as neither good nor bad. They just provide information and I can learn from them. This requires a process of learning emotion regulation, and it can be helpful to find things that are safe emotional containers. So for me, listening to music is a safe emotional container. I am able to listen to a song that explains and describes how I'm feeling and connect to the emotions of that song, and it feels safer than just to do it on my own. So that was really helpful early on. Also, doing artwork is really helpful for connecting to the disconnected parts. Doing things like artwork, drawing, playing music, singing, these things can all get your psyche more integrated, and artwork is a really healthy, useful way to process experiences. Part of developing a dissociative disorder is having a lot of shame instilled by primary caregivers. When there's a lot of shame, the person will subconsciously disconnect from parts of their self and their experience. They'll hide themselves due to shame, unconsciously. When there's conditional love in the primary caregiver relationships, this can also lead to a person disconnecting parts of themselves in order to be who the caregiver wants them to be, and therefore get the love that they need. I did therapy when I was a teenager, but I didn't find it helpful because I didn't really feel understood. But I was lucky in my 20s to find a very good, understanding therapist who I felt like actually saw the real me, actually saw me for myself. And I felt unconditional, positive regard. That's what it's called in therapy. When their care for you is not conditional, when you feel unconditional care from this person. And that can be extremely healing in situations of dissociative disorders, because one of the reasons for the formation of dissociative disorders, other than genetic predisposition, is conditional love from caretakers. A baby and a child will need unconditional love from their caretaker in order to develop healthily. If they don't feel this, they will feel unsafe and insecure. Having unconditional care and positive regard from a therapist can teach you how to have a healthy attachment and can kind of fill in those experiences that you missed when you were a kid. And this can teach you how to feel that towards yourself, how to internalize that feeling of care towards yourself. This in turn helps you to accept all aspects of yourself and your experiences. The malevolent-protector parts that compel the dissociation can be very scary if you don't know what's going on. I thought that there were just other people in my head that wanted to hurt me or kill me. With dissociation, there's normally a disconnect within the psyche in a sort of structure of polarities. So you'll have, for example, you'll have a part that disconnects that is more innocent and vulnerable. The psyche will disconnect them and keep them inside to keep them safe. And you can have a part disconnect, for example, that is known as a malevolent protector, that will compel self-destructive coping skills to keep the mind disintegrated, to protect the more vulnerable parts that are held safe inside. An important part of my recovery in adulthood has been acknowledging and learning to work with these malevolent protector parts, thanking them for helping in the way that they knew how in the past. Another important part of healing has been stopping self-destructive coping skills, because self-destructive coping skills will keep the mind disintegrated and will compel dissociation. So you often see self-destructive coping skills present in people with dissociative disorders, and an important part of recovering and learning to become less dissociated is to stop those self-destructive coping skills that compel the dissociation, and letting them know that in the present they don't have to do unhealthy coping skills anymore, that we can handle having those overwhelming experiences integrated into conscious awareness, that they don't have to keep those vulnerable parts disconnected for safety anymore. Now I have a lot more of a harmonious relationship between me and the other parts, because I've learned that I don't need to be afraid of them and I don't need to push them away. We're actually a lot more functional when we're working together and acknowledging each other and taking care of each other. A lot of therapy has been learning how to acknowledge and listen to those disconnected parts and figure out what they need and what they're communicating to me, so that I can learn how to help them and learn how to meet their needs. Learning how to accept some of the different views of the dissociated parts and holding their view and my view together in my mind has helped a lot to decrease tension between me and the other parts. Learning to accept that different parts may hold very polarized different viewpoints, and learning how to contain both of these viewpoints simultaneously within your mind knowing that even if things seem opposite, it doesn't mean that one exists and the other doesn't. Polarized views can both have some truth, and you can hold both within your mind. You can learn to be a healthy, supportive person for the other senses of self. You can learn to be the person that you needed when you were younger, and you can learn to reparent yourself. A big part of my own healing has been learning how to be a healthy person for myself, and how to give the other disconnected parts inside my mind the love and connection and understanding that they need and didn't receive during childhood. For example, it was not safe for me to express anger, and so some disconnected parts instead held that anger, and I remained unaware of it for a long time. An important part of recovery now has been allowing those parts to feel safe to express anger, and allowing them to share that anger with me so that we can carry it together. And that also allows me to feel it, and in that way I can process it. It's been very therapeutic to learn how to reparent the different senses of self and give them what they were missing in childhood. A big part of my own healing has been learning how to be a healthy person for myself, and how to give the other disconnected parts inside my mind the love and connection and understanding that they need. And it helps them to know that I will hear them and listen and validate their viewpoint, even if I don't necessarily agree with it myself. If you're dealing with a dissociative disorder, I definitely recommend seeking therapy and finding a therapist that you feel you can actually connect with and you feel actually sees the real you, because this can be very helpful for learning how to get more connected to your overall sense of self and accepting all parts of yourself and your experiences. And be patient with yourself. That's a big thing. Disorders like this are very complex, and it can take a lot of time healing. So be patient with yourself and your disconnected parts. A couple resources that I've found really helpful: Inner World of Trauma, Archetypal Defenses of the Personal Spirit. Another really useful book is The Stranger in the Mirror. And then for more in-depth useful text, The Haunted Self, The Theory of Structural Dissociation. And then also Coping with Trauma-Related Dissociation. I hope if you can relate to any of this that you found it helpful to know that there are others going through the same thing.